there! Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I don't think anyone was quite expecting me to post today, but I am going to try to add another segment on Saturdays. It'll be more geared towards like the paranormal side of things or conspiracy theories, stuff like that, or history, because I really enjoy learning history more so than we did in school. So if that's something you're interested, you could always hit the little subscribe button down below and the little bell icon so you can be notified when I upload if you're interested. Only if you're interested. But I thought it'd be fun to add something that wasn't just true crime, because that can get so heavy for my mental health. And so adding something, I don't want to say lighter, but different, I think would be nice for everybody. But yeah, I figured that while we were doing this, I would do my makeup. So I do want to tell you when we start, I am not a makeup artist. I know there's a theory behind makeup. I do not know that theory. I just do my makeup for what I feel works for me. And so, yeah, just please be gentle because I am not a makeup artist. I'm not claiming to be. I just figured we'd do my makeup while talking about something, and then I'm going to film my Tuesday video after that. So yeah, if you want to come along on this ride with me, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below, and yeah, let's get started. I will post the things that I use down in the description below because I will try to show everything that I'm using, but I will probably forget sometimes once I start getting into the story. So if you're wanting to know what I am using, it's down in the description, but I'm going to start off with the e.l.f. Power Grip Primer. I don't really like this primer. I know it was super popular over TikTok, but I'm one of those people when I buy something, I have to finish using it. So here we are. But a couple weeks ago, I was scrolling through TikTok and I saw a video about the execution of Anne Boleyn. And this led me down a rabbit hole of all the Tudors. I was absolutely fascinated and was really quite shocked that a lot of the history that I learned about was not actually taught in schools or when I went to school. And so, yeah, I figured we just go down the rabbit hole of specifically King Henry VIII and all of his wives, because I was very surprised at some of the things that I learned about. So obviously we're going to start with his first wife, and that was Catherine of Aragon. Catherine was born on December 16th of 1485. She was born near what is now Madrid, and she was the daughter of King Ferdinand II and Queen Isabella. King Ferdinand was the ruler of Aragon, while Queen Elizabeth was the ruler of Castile, and they married to kind of join the two regions together. So Catherine was the last surviving daughter of this couple, and they were a very religious ruling couple. Catholicism was what they believed in, and they were very, very religious. So Catherine grew up also very religious. And Catherine was born to this very powerful couple, and she was basically taught how to be a queen from a very young age. Catherine was very educated. She knew several different languages, and yeah, she was just very smart. She was a very bright and smart girl, and she was taught by many scholars who were very well known during that time. Isabella was known to be a beautiful girl and very sweet and charming in her nature. But during these times, marriages were used as kind of bargaining chips in between different countries. This is where we introduce King Henry VII. So King Henry VII won the English crown by going to war with King Richard, who was the current ruler. King Richard, this would be the final way, like this would be the last time that the King of England would be, like that they would announce someone the King of England by battle. He did have a small claim to the throne. He was a descendant of John of Gaunt's third wife, but their children were born out of wedlock, so they were barred from any kind of claim to the throne. So his position as king was kind of precarious. So he had two sons, Prince Arthur and Henry. He had his eye on Catherine from a very young age, and because it would be really good for him if his son Arthur, who would be king one day, would marry Catherine. Not just because Catherine was sweet and loving and intelligent, but because Catherine technically had a stronger claim to the throne than King Henry did. So you know how I said that King Henry VII was a descendant of John of Gaunt's third wife, and they were born out of wedlock? Well, Catherine was a descendant of his John of Gaunt's second wife. So she had a stronger claim to the English throne than King Henry did. So if Catherine married Arthur, then any child that they had would have an undeniable claim to the English throne, which would ensure that the Tudors stayed in power. Not only that, there was a tension with France and England at the time, and since the areas of Castile and Aragon were pretty powerful, especially together, if they were to marry Catherine to Prince Arthur, then there would be an alliance between the two countries, which would be very good for England, considering the tension they had with France. So when Catherine was just 3 years old, she was betrothed to King Arthur. She stayed in the area of Castile and Aragon to continue her studies and to be trained to be queen. But in 1499, Arthur and Catherine were married by proxy. So she was still in Spain and he was in England, but they were married by proxy. And then in 1501, in November of 1501, Catherine came to England and they were officially married. They were just 15 years old at the time, but Arthur seemed to be a good man, and he wrote a letter to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel and said that he promised to love their daughter and to be a good husband to her. And it seemed like he had every intention of fulfilling that promise. But just 4 months into their marriage, both Catherine and Arthur became sick with the sweating sickness, and unfortunately, Arthur would die. Catherine did survive, she did recover from this, but this threw England into kind of a frenzy because they didn't know, yes, there was another heir to the throne, King Henry VIII, or Prince Henry VIII, but he had not been trained to be king. And he was just 10 years old at the time. So his education quickly changed from just general studies to learning how to be king. And then there was the problem of Catherine. What was England going to do with Catherine? King Henry VII was still very interested in keeping this alliance alive and well, so he started looking at ways to keep Catherine in England. He even considered marrying Catherine himself so that they could keep this alliance. And both King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were not interested in this. They had zero desire in their daughter marrying an aging king. And so then they started discussing Catherine marrying Prince Henry. Now, Isabella's mother was very for this idea. She really wanted Catherine to marry Prince Henry, but Ferdinand was against it. He did not want that to happen. He wanted his daughter to come back home and be with him. And so much so that he even procrastinated paying the dowry that he had promised to England for the marriage of Arthur and Catherine. Now, a dowry is a payment that the bride's family will make to the husband's family as like a wedding gift. I don't know. But it's a financial agreement between the two families, and it's the responsibility of the bride's family to pay this dowry. And Catherine's was actually the largest in history. So Catherine is basically stuck in England during this time, and there's really like nowhere for her to go because they haven't settled on if Catherine should marry Prince Henry. And so, yeah, it's just kind of like this weird time in Catherine's life where she's just kind of stuck in England. But Catherine was so intelligent, and she was just such a good person that she would eventually become the ambassador for Spain in England, and she would be the first female to do so in European history. So this woman was incredibly intelligent and just She was just amazing, to say the least. But either way, King Henry VII would die in 1509, and King Henry VIII was only 18 years old at the time. But he and Catherine seemed to have quite a bit in common, and he really seemed to admire Catherine. So one of the first things he did was he told the Pope that the last wishes of his father was that he marry Catherine. He wanted to take Catherine as his wife. Now, they did have some hurdles that they had to get through because Catherine had been married to King Arthur before. But Catherine said that her and Arthur had never consummated their marriage, so the marriage wasn't like fully complete. I guess back in those times, you had to consummate the marriage in order for it to be like completely legal. And Catherine told the Pope that her and Arthur had never consummated their marriage. There is debate between that because people just kind of assumed that they had consummated their marriage, but Catherine said that they hadn't. And this actually wouldn't be a problem for many, many years later. But eventually, Catherine and Henry were married on June 11th of 1509. It was said that they had a beautiful wedding and things were just going really well for them. Catherine and Henry seemed to be getting along really well. And I think this is where history gets a little bit skewed when it comes to King Henry. So we all know him as this like chauvinistic, just terrible person. But it seems like in the beginning of their marriage, Henry was a very good king. He was very loved. He was known to be very generous. And a lot of people spoke of him like he was more of a companion than a king. So he was kind to the people that he was king to, and he was kind to Catherine, and they really seemed to be in love, and they really seemed to have a really good relationship. Many people talk that it was like there was mutual respect between the two because Catherine was so intelligent and she was so powerful in her role as queen. People really respected her, and Henry really respected her and her thoughts and opinions. Yeah, so at first, during the initial parts of his reign, King Henry was loved by the people. He was compassionate and he was kind. He loved to party, and I think so did Catherine. But that was a very common thing for people to do in that time. And we also I think we get these when we think about people from such a far time back, we think about kings and queens, but really Henry was 18 years old. He wanted to party. He wanted to have a good time. I don't think that's going to change so dramatically between all these years. I remember when I was 18, I just wanted to have a good time too, but he was king and he was very kind and caring, and he just seemed to be a really good king is what I'm trying to get at. But let's talk more about Catherine. We already know that she was a badass, but she was an even bigger badass than we think. So there was a time that, tension was still there was still a lot of tension between France and England during this time, even with this alliance between Castile and Aragon and England. And there was a time where King Henry went to France to campaign. And during his visit to France, the King of Scotland, King James IV, decided that it was a good time to declare war against England because they were in a vulnerable state because their king was in France. But Catherine was not going to have anything to do with this. She was heavily pregnant during this time, and she rode into battle, fully armored, fully pregnant. I'm not talking a couple of weeks along. She was pregnant, and she rode into battle and to rally the troops, and England won this battle, and King James IV actually died. And she sent a portion of his blood-soaked coat back home to prove that they had won this. So she was not just smart and beautiful, but she was brave and really seemed to be a good companion for her King Henry. So while it seemed like they had a really good relationship at first, there were cracks that were starting to show, and that was because back in those days, the king really needed a male heir to take the throne after the king died. A daughter wasn't as sought after because that wasn't really a viable claim to the throne. Like, that wouldn't really be an heir. They really needed a male heir to take the throne. And it seems like Catherine and Henry really had trouble getting, having children. According to scholars, Catherine was pregnant anywhere from 6 to 9 times, and they would only have one surviving child from all of these pregnancies. So I'm going to read off these pregnancies here. But she had a stillborn daughter at 33 weeks after their marriage in January of 1510. Then she had a son that they named Henry in January of 1511, but he was only 52 days old when he died. She had another son in September of 1513. That was the baby that she was pregnant with when she went into battle with King James, and he died as a newborn. Then in November of 1514, she had another son that was a stillborn. And in February of 1516, she had a daughter named Mary. Now, this would be their only surviving child. And Mary would actually go on to be queen later on in her life. And then in November of 1518, she would have another stillborn daughter. So it's important to note that during these times, a woman was considered fully responsible for the gender of the baby and also the health of the baby. But children only had like a 50% chance of making it to adulthood during these times. And healthy pregnancies were kind of few and far between. So many children didn't make it past, the newborn stage. So really, and we all know that we can't determine the gender of a baby. King Henry was starting to get really frustrated at the fact that he was not getting a male heir while he was married to Catherine, and he started blaming Catherine for this because it's her responsibility to make sure that she's having a boy, because how you can control that, I don't know, and this is where the cracks really started showing in their relationship. Things were getting they were falling apart. They had a beautiful relationship in the past, but King Henry was starting to blame Catherine for not getting a male heir and not being able to further his dynasty. And it seems like with every child that she lost, Catherine became more and more sad. And not only that, but she was getting older, and so it was going to be harder for her to become pregnant. And this was really tearing the couple apart. So with every child that was lost, Henry and Catherine fell further and further out of love. Now here's where it might be pretty easy to look at Henry like a kind of a trash human being, but Henry was deeply religious. He was just a very religious man, and he started to blame Catherine for the loss of his children and for him not having a male heir. And the reason he blamed Catherine was because she had been married to Arthur, his brother. Now, he found religious texts that said something along the lines of any man who marries his brother's wife is basically sinning, is basically going against God's will. And so he spoke to religious scholars, and they told them, in these religious texts, it said that if you take your brother's wife, you will be childless. And these scholars told Henry that in this text, it meant that that was why he was not getting his male heir. That this meant that he would not have any male children because he had taken his brother's wife, and this is why he was not having any male children. So during this time, King Henry actually noticed one of Catherine's ladies in waiting, and that was Anne Boleyn. And I think she's probably the most famous of all of King Henry's wives, and so he started to have like this affair with Anne Boleyn. And we'll go deeper into Anne Boleyn next Saturday because she's going to be his second wife. But it seemed like Henry thought that if he could marry somebody else that had not been married to his brother previously, that he would be able to have this male heir. So King Henry started looking into divorcing Catherine. Now, back during these days, it was pretty common for a king to have affairs because it was considered dangerous to have relations while a woman was pregnant. So it was pretty normal for a king to have affairs with other women. And I'm going to use this tiny mirror to do my eye makeup. And King Henry took Anne Boleyn as one of his mistresses, and she was a lady in waiting, which she would have been like a companion to Catherine. And so he took her as a mistress, and they slowly started falling in love. And this is when King Henry started looking at divorcing Catherine, or he went public with his desire to divorce Catherine. But the Pope was very much against this, and he would not be successful in getting a divorce from Catherine for about 7 years. And it seemed like Anne Boleyn was very much wanting him to divorce Catherine so that they could get married. Sorry, I completely covered my face there. But it seemed like Anne Boleyn was very dedicated to trying to get them to divorce. And she actually told King Henry that he really should be the head of the church because the king is ruler over all. So it would be after King Henry broke away from the church of like the Roman church and became the head of the Church of England that he basically granted himself the divorce from Catherine and banished her from the English court forever. Catherine was very against the divorce. She did not want to divorce King Henry, and she fought against it, but eventually King Henry got his way and he married Anne Boleyn. Okay, so I finished my makeup off camera. I just put some highlight and some mascara on, but King Henry and Anne Boleyn got married, and Catherine was banished from the English courts, and she spent the rest of her life in a castle locked up into one room, only leaving to attend mass. This divorce really affected her, and it was very hard on her. She did not want it at all, but was kind of forced into it. In December of 1535, Catherine would write her last letter to King Henry. In it, she asked Henry to remember her kindly and to just take care of their daughter and be a good father to Mary. She then wrote, "Lastly, do I vow that my eyes desire you above all else." And on January 7th of 1536, Catherine was 50 years old, and she died of what people believe was cancer. Her death was mourned by all the people of England. She was a beloved queen, and she was just a good human. She was a kind and compassionate queen, and many people did not accept Anne Boleyn as their new queen, and they thought that Catherine was the Queen of England. But Henry and Anne Boleyn were seen celebrating her death, showing off their new daughter Elizabeth. But there is a rumor that after King Henry was alone in his chambers after the night celebration, that he wept bitterly. And I tend to believe this because I do think that Henry and Catherine really did have a genuine love for each other and a genuine respect for each other during their marriage. What Henry did was wrong, and I think he really hurt Catherine. But when somebody is so deeply indoctrinated into religious text, I can see why he would believe that this was what was best for him. It still doesn't make it right, and I'm not defending him, but I do believe that he mourned Catherine's death and that he truly did love her. And it was during this time that King Henry was still a generous man and still a good man. We'll talk more about King Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn next week. And that's where things get a little spicy, I guess you could say. But what are your thoughts on this? Do you think King Henry actually loved Catherine, or do you think that it was just a marriage of marriage that they needed to ensure England's safety? I'd love to know your thoughts on this down below in the comments. And just a small reminder, if you want to, you can subscribe and hit the little bell icon so you can be notified when I upload. I will get better at putting my makeup on camera. Finished look. But yeah, let me know your thoughts down below, and that's really all I have for you today. So I hope this finds you well, healthy, happy, all those things, and I'll see you next time. Bye.